They mocked the janitor mopping the Veterans Hall lobby, calling her clumsy when her cart tipped over. Sarah steadied herself, and her sleeve rode up. What no one knew. The faded tattoo on her forearm was a combat medic's mark, and the silver-haired veteran staring from across the room had flat-lined in her arms in Kandahar. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. They mocked the janitor mopping the Veterans Hall lobby, calling her clumsy when her cart tipped over. Sarah steadied herself, and her sleeve rode up. What no one knew. The faded tattoo on her forearm was a combat medic's mark, and the silver-haired veteran staring from across the room had flatlined in her arms in Kandahar. The marble floors of the Veterans Memorial Hall gleamed under crystal chandeliers, reflecting the polished shoes of donors and organizers who moved through the space like water flowing around stones. Sarah Henderson pushed her mop in steady strokes, her worn uniform hanging loose on a frame that had once been stronger, her hands calloused and cracked from years of work that left no mark on the world. She was 42 years old and invisible. People walked past her, through the space she occupied, their conversations flowing over her head as if she were nothing more than furniture. A group of young corporate sponsors clustered near the entrance, their laughter sharp and bright as broken glass, making jokes about the help and whether the hall could afford better staff. Sarah kept her head down, her movements efficient and practiced, the muscle memory of military discipline still present in the way she worked. Her scuffed shoes squeaked slightly against the wet floor. Her name tag, handwritten and cheap, hung crooked on her chest. The cart beside her held supplies that smelled of bleach and lemon, the tools of a trade no one respected. Someone bumped her cart as they passed, not bothering to look back or apologize, and the whole thing tipped sideways with a crash that echoed through the lobby. Bottles rolled across the pristine marble. A mop clattered to the ground. The laughter from the corporate sponsors intensified, one of them saying she could not even push a cart straight, another suggesting maybe she should find a different line of work. Sarah felt the heat rise in her face but said nothing. She had learned long ago that words changed nothing. She knelt on the cold floor, gathering the scattered supplies with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion, from pain that lived in her lower back like a permanent guest, from something deeper that had no name. As she reached for a fallen bottle of cleaning solution, her sleeve rode up her forearm, exposing skin marked with faded black ink. The tattoo was old, the lines blurred by time and sun, but the image remained clear to anyone who knew how to read it. A combat medic's caduceus, intertwined with unit numbers and coordinates that meant nothing to most people and everything to a few. Across the lobby, Colonel Thomas Mitchell stood with a champagne flute in his hand, his silver hair perfectly styled, his tailored suit speaking of wealth and success. He was 58 years old and hollow. He greeted guests with practiced warmth, his smile never quite reaching his eyes, playing the role of distinguished donor and keynote speaker with the same efficiency Sarah brought to mopping floors. Something made him glance toward the commotion, perhaps the crash of the cart or the burst of cruel laughter, and he was about to dismiss it, about to return to his conversation about quarterly projections and defense contracts, when he saw her, when he saw the tattoo. Time stopped. His champagne flute nearly slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers. The color drained from his face like water from a broken cup. His breath caught in his throat. The tattoo was unmistakable. 68th Combat Support Hospital, Kandahar, the exact unit that had saved his life. But more than that, the specific coordinates tattooed beneath the caduceus matched the forward operating base where he had died, where he had flatlined, where a woman with determined eyes had refused to let him go. The world around Thomas blurred, and he was no longer standing in a marble lobby, but lying in sand and blood under a merciless Afghan sun. 13 years fell away like shed skin. The explosion came first in memory, the burning Humvee, the taste of copper and grit. The way sound became distant and distorted, as if he were underwater. He remembered fading in and out of consciousness. each moment of awareness bringing fresh waves of agony. Then a woman's voice, calm but urgent, cutting through the chaos. "Stay with me, soldier. You do not get to leave. Not today." Hands on his chest, pressing, fighting against the tide, pulling him under. The terrible sound of a flatline, that electronic keen that meant the end. That same voice, fiercer now, touched with something raw and defiant. "No. Come back." That is an order. The shock of revival. Electricity forcing his heart to remember its rhythm. Gasping back into a world of pain and light and noise. Looking up through dust and smoke into eyes behind goggles. Eyes that held his gaze like an anchor. Eyes that promised he would not die alone on foreign soil. Then, nothing. Medevac. Germany. Recovery. Years of asking questions that had no answers because the records were sealed after the base attack, because the medic who saved him had been lost to bureaucracy and classified files. Because fate had other plans. Thomas blinked and he was back in the lobby. His heart racing. His hands shaking. He could not look away from Sarah as she finished collecting her supplies. As she pulled her sleeve down over the tattoo that connected them across time and trauma, as she stood and pushed her cart toward the service corridor with the same invisible efficiency she brought to everything. Thomas excused himself mid-sentence from a conversation about corporate sponsorship levels, his voice sounding strange in his own ears. He crossed the lobby in long strides, his purpose singular and urgent. He found the hall director, Robert, a thin man with nervous energy and too much cologne. "The janitor," Thomas said. "The woman who just left. What is her name?" Robert looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting. "Sarah something. Henderson, maybe. She is new. Couple months, perhaps." Thomas felt something sharp twist in his chest. "I need to speak with her." Robert shifted his weight. "Sir, if there is a complaint, I can handle it through proper channels." "Not a complaint," Thomas said, his voice sharper than intended. "I need to speak with her. Now." He followed the direction Sarah had gone, down a narrow service corridor that smelled of industrial cleaner and old building, until he found her in a small supply closet, sitting on an overturned bucket. Her sleeve was rolled up again and she stared at her own tattoo, her eyes distant and haunted, seeing things that were not in this room, this building, this city. Thomas knocked softly on the open door. Sarah startled like a soldier hearing incoming fire, immediately pulling her sleeve down and standing, her body language shifting to something professional and closed. "I am sorry, sir. I will be out of your way." Thomas stepped into the small space, surrounded by cleaning supplies and the ghosts of 13 years. "Kandahar," he said. 2012, 68th CSH. Sarah froze. Her face went pale. The silence between them stretched and filled with weight, with recognition, with everything that could not be said. Thomas felt his voice break slightly. "You were the medic! You brought me back!" Sarah's professional mask cracked like old paint. "I do not know what you mean." Thomas held up his own wrist, showing a small tattoo he had gotten years ago, the date he died and was revived inked in simple numbers. "I flatlined twice. You shocked me back both times. Your voice. I would know it anywhere." Sarah's eyes filled with tears she would not let fall. Years of practice at holding things together, keeping her upright. "That was a long time ago, sir. Different life." Thomas took a careful step closer. "Why are you here? Like this?" Sarah's defensive walls went up, brick by brick, the same walls that had kept her alive through everything that came after Kandahar. "I work here. I have to get back to my duties." She tried to move past him, but Thomas shifted to block the doorway, not threatening, just present, just refusing to let this moment slip away like all the others. "Please," he said. "I have spent 13 years wondering who saved my life. Just give me 5 minutes." Sarah's internal struggle played across her face. Pride and shame and pain mixing in equal measure. "There is nothing to tell. I did my job. You survived. That is how it is supposed to work. But what happened to you?" Thomas asked. Nothing that concerns you, Sarah replied, then hesitated. Colonel, I am sorry. I do not know your name. Thomas. Thomas Mitchell. Recognition flickered in Sarah's eyes. She knew the name. He was the gala's keynote speaker, the major donor, the success story, everything she was not. The knowledge made her more defensive, more determined to protect what little dignity she had left. Well, Mr. Mitchell, some of us do not get fairy tale endings. Now, if you will excuse me. She pushed past him with the force of someone who had pushed through worse, leaving Thomas standing alone in the supply closet, surrounded by mops and buckets and industrial cleaner, his mind racing with questions that had no answers. He noticed something on the floor where she had been sitting. A worn name tag that must have fallen from her uniform. S. Henderson, handwritten in blue ballpoint pen on cheap adhesive paper, not the official brass plates the other employees wore. Thomas picked it up, held it in his palm like a holy relic, and made a decision that would change both their lives. He would find out what happened to the woman who saved him. He would understand why a decorated combat medic was mopping floors in a veterans' hall, invisible and forgotten. He would not let her disappear again. The gala preparations continued around him, voices and laughter and the clink of glasses. But Thomas heard none of it. He stood in that small closet, holding a cheap name tag, and felt the weight of 13 years of survivor's guilt crystallize into something new. Purpose. The marble floors gleamed. The chandeliers sparkled. The donors laughed and planned their evening of celebration. And somewhere in the service corridors, Sarah Henderson pushed her cart and tried to forget that someone had finally seen her. Tried to ignore the dangerous flutter of hope that maybe, just maybe, her story was not over yet. Thomas could not sleep that night. He sat in his luxury penthouse overlooking the city, floor-to-ceiling windows, framing a skyline of lights that felt as distant and cold as stars. He was alone. He was always alone. The penthouse was silent except for the hum of climate control and the occasional sound of traffic far below, and the silence pressed against him like a physical weight. 7 years ago his wife Rebecca had died, cancer taking her piece by piece until there was nothing left but memories and an empty bed he could not bear to sleep in anymore. They had never had children. There had always been time later, or so they thought, until later became never. And he was left with a fortune and no one to share it with. He had poured himself into work after her death, into building his defense contracting company bigger and more successful, into philanthropy and donations and galas, where he gave speeches about supporting veterans. But the survivor's guilt had haunted him through every success, through every milestone, whispering the same question over and over. Why did you live when others died? Why you and not them? He had donated millions to veteran causes, funded programs and scholarships and memorials. But it never filled the void, never answered the question, never let him sleep through the night without waking in a cold sweat, remembering sand and blood, and a woman's voice commanding him to live. Now he knew who she was. Now he had a name. Sarah Henderson. Thomas made calls as soon as the sun rose, using connections built over decades in defense and government circles, pulling strings that most people did not even know existed. His assistant Jennifer brought him a file the next morning, setting it on his desk with a concerned expression. "Sir," she said, "this is everything I could find. But it is not much." Thomas opened the file and felt his heart sink. The file was thin, suspiciously thin for someone who had served multiple tours and saved lives. Sarah Henderson, enlisted at 19 years old, trained as a combat medic, multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Commendations and citations for valor scattered through her record like breadcrumbs. 3 soldiers officially saved by her direct actions, though Thomas suspected the real number was higher, much higher. Then the record changed. Medical discharge. Honorable, but the reasons listed were vague, bureaucratic language that said everything and nothing. After her discharge, the trail went cold. No permanent address for years. Spotty employment records with gaps of months, sometimes longer. Her current address was listed as a low-income apartment building in the worst part of the city. The kind of place where police sirens were a lullaby and hope went to die. No family listed as next of kin. No emergency contacts. No one. Thomas recognized the signs because he had seen them before in other veterans, had funded studies and programs trying to address them. PTSD. System failure. A hero used up and discarded, left to navigate a civilian world that had no place for the skills she had learned. No use for the sacrifices she had made. He closed the file and stared out his window at the city below, thinking about invisible people in visible places, about janitors and cashiers, and all the forgotten soldiers still fighting battles no one else could see. Sarah Henderson woke that same morning in her studio apartment, sunlight filtering through thin curtains that did not quite close all the way. Her first conscious act was to reach for the medications lined up on her bedside table like soldiers at attention. Pills for sleep that never quite came, pills for anxiety that never quite left, pills for pain that lived in her lower back like an old friend who overstayed their welcome. She swallowed them with water from a plastic cup and sat on the edge of her bed, waiting for her body to remember how to function. The apartment was small and sparse. Walls bare except for one photograph pinned above a second-hand dresser. Her old unit, young faces smiling at the camera, sunburned and exhausted and alive. She had counted them once. The faces in that photo who were gone now, counted them and stopped because the number was too high and climbing. Half of them were gone now, lost to combat or suicide, or the slow decay of coming home to a country that thanked them for their service and then looked away. Sarah showered and dressed carefully, pulling on long sleeves despite the heat building outside, covering the tattoo that had become both identity and burden. She caught the first bus at 6 a.m, transferred to a second. Watched the city wake up around her through scratched plastic windows. The landlord caught her in the hallway as she was leaving, a man with suspicious eyes and cheap cologne. "Henderson," he said, "we need to talk about rent." "I know," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. "I am working on it. You have been working on it for 3 weeks. I need payment by Friday or you are out." "Understood." She walked past him with military posture, spine straight, chin up, refusing to let him see her fear. The Veterans Hall was quiet when she arrived, the gala still days away. And she began her work with the same efficiency she brought to everything, muscle memory taking over while her mind wandered. But she could not stop thinking about the supply closet, about silver hair and the tattoo on a wrist that matched the date on her own records, about a voice saying, "I have spent 13 years wondering who saved my life." That night, Sarah worked her second job, the overnight shift at a gas station on the edge of town, where the fluorescent lights hummed and flickered, and the coffee was always stale. She was exhausted, running on empty, but military discipline kept her upright, kept her moving through each hour like a march through hostile territory. The pain in her back flared, and she took more pills than she should have, knowing it and doing it anyway because the alternative was worse. A homeless veteran came in near midnight, a man maybe 10 years older than her, with wild hair and haunted eyes, and an army jacket that had seen better decades. Sarah watched him count coins for coffee, watched him come up short, watched him start to leave. "Wait," she said, pouring a fresh cup and handing it to him. "On the house." The man looked at her with something like recognition, not of her face but of what she was. "You serve?" he asked. "Yeah," Sarah said. "Long time ago." The man nodded, took the coffee with shaking hands. "Thank you, sister." Sarah watched him leave and felt the familiar ache in her chest, the one that had nothing to do with her back injury and everything to do with seeing herself in strangers, in forgotten soldiers, in people the world had decided to stop seeing. The core of who she was had not changed despite everything. She still could not walk past suffering without trying to ease it, still gave what little she had to those who had less, still believed in something she could not quite name anymore. 3 days later, Sarah was cleaning the main gallery after hours, her mop moving in steady rhythms across hardwood floors that gleamed like dark water. She heard footsteps and looked up to see Thomas Mitchell walking toward her. And her first instinct was to run, but she did not run. She kept working, kept her head down, hoped he would pass by like everyone else did. He sat on a wooden bench near where she was working, set down 2 paper cups that steamed in the cool air of the gallery. "I brought extra," he said. "It is getting cold in here." Sarah gripped her mop handle. "I am working, Mr. Mitchell. I know. I will be quiet." He sat in silence, and Sarah tried to ignore him, tried to focus on her work, but his presence was too large, too insistent. 15 minutes passed in awkward quiet before her curiosity won over her pride. She set the mop against the wall, sat on the opposite end of the bench, accepted the coffee but maintained careful distance. "I found your service record," Thomas said, his voice gentle. "Or what is left of it." Sarah tensed, her fingers tightening around the warm cup. "You saved 8 lives officially. How many unofficially?" "I did not count," Sarah said. "Why did you not ever reach out?" "To the soldiers you saved." Sarah laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "And say what? Hey, remember me. I am doing great, mopping floors and barely making rent." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then asked the question she had been dreading. "What happened, Sarah?" Long silence stretched between them, filled with all the things she had never told anyone, all the weight she carried alone. Finally, the dam broke. "You want to know what happened?" Sarah said. "I will tell you." The words poured out like blood from a wound finally opened. The attack on the base 2 weeks after she saved Thomas. The mortar fire that came at dawn. She was injured, shrapnel in her back, nerve damage that never fully healed. She watched 3 of her friends die that morning, held their hands as they slipped away, their blood warm on her skin. She kept working through the pain, did not report her injuries fully because they needed her, because there was no one else, because that was what you did. She was discharged 6 months later with chronic pain and PTSD, and a thank you for your service that meant nothing. Came home to nothing. Her parents had died in a car accident while she was deployed. A letter arriving 3 weeks late telling her to come to a funeral that was already over. No job skills translated to civilian life. No support system. The VA was overwhelmed. Wait lists stretching months and years, appointments that led nowhere. Depression settled in like fog. Nightmares every time she closed her eyes. She could not hold jobs that required trust, could not explain the gaps in her resume, could not make people understand that she was still fighting a war no one else could see. She lost her apartment, lived in her car for 6 months, cleaned herself up eventually, takes whatever work she can find, survives one day at a time. "I saved lives for a living," Sarah said, her voice breaking, "and I cannot even save my own." Thomas looked shaken, his face pale in the dim gallery light. "You saved my life, and the system failed you." "The system fails lots of us," Sarah said. "I am not special. You are to me," Thomas replied. "Do you know what I did after Kandahar?" He told his own story then, about going back to his defense contracting company, about the guilt that was overwhelming, survivor's guilt mixed with moral injury, questions that had no good answers. He built the company bigger, made millions, but the money felt like blood money, felt like profiting from the same war that had broken people like Sarah. His wife died, and he was alone with his guilt and his fortune, and no way to make sense of either. He started donating, trying to buy redemption with charity galas and scholarship funds and memorial buildings, but it never filled the hole. "Because I could not thank the person who actually saved me. I have spent 13 years looking for purpose, and you have been invisible. I did not save you so you could pity me," Sarah said, standing. "This is not pity," Thomas said. "This is—" "Let me help you," Thomas called after her. "I do not need charity. It is not charity. It is a debt." Sarah stopped, her hand on the doorframe. Thomas stood, walked closer but not too close, respecting the distance she needed. "I run a company. I need people with your skills, Sarah scoffed. I mop floors. You managed trauma under fire, Thomas said. You made life or death decisions. You led teams in the worst conditions imaginable. That was a lifetime ago. Was it? Or have you just been told you are worthless so many times you believed it? Silence fell between them again, but this time it was different, charged with possibility. I have a veterans employment program, Thomas said. It is real, not a handout. Training, positions, benefits, meaningful work. Why me? Sarah asked. Because you earned it 13 years ago, Thomas said. And every day since. Sarah felt the war inside her, pride battling desperation, battling hope. She was afraid to feel because hope hurt worse than despair when it died. I need to think. Take all the time you need, Thomas said, pulling out a business card and holding it out to her. But Sarah, you deserve better than this. You always did. Sarah took the card with trembling fingers, stared at it like it might disappear if she looked away. Thomas watched her, this woman who had saved his life, this invisible hero who mopped floors and gave homeless veterans coffee she could not afford, this soldier still fighting when everyone else had declared the war over. The gallery was quiet around them. The city breathed beyond the walls, and between them hung a question neither could answer, a possibility neither could name, a chance at redemption that might save them both, or break them trying. 2 days passed, and Sarah sat in her studio apartment, holding Thomas Mitchell's business card like it was made of glass, turning it over in her calloused fingers while pride and fear waged war inside her chest. She had not called. Could not call. The very idea of accepting help felt like surrender, like admitting she could not survive on her own, like proving right every person who had ever looked at her with pity or dismissed her as broken. A knock at the door shattered her thoughts, and she opened it to find her landlord holding an eviction notice, his face set in hard lines. You are 3 days late, Henderson, he said. I am done waiting. You have 1 week to pay $2,000 or you are out on the street. Sarah took the notice with steady hands, even as her world tilted, closed the door, and looked at her bank account on her phone screen. $417. The math was simple and brutal. She could not make it. She worked double shifts at both jobs, the Veterans Hall during the day and the gas station at night, her body running on fumes and willpower, the pain in her back flaring like fire with every movement. At the gas station on the 3rd night she nearly collapsed, her vision swimming, her legs giving out, and a regular customer caught her elbow. An older veteran with kind eyes and weathered hands. You okay, kid? He asked. I am fine, Sarah said through gritted teeth. Just tired. The veteran looked at her the way soldiers look at each other when they recognize the signs. You active duty. Was, Sarah said. The veteran nodded slowly. Then you know the rule. Never leave a soldier behind. That includes yourself. Sarah wanted to tell him she was trying, wanted to explain that she had been fighting alone for so long she did not know any other way. But the words stuck in her throat, and she just nodded and got back to work. The next morning, Sarah left the gas station as the sun was rising. So exhausted she could barely see straight, her body moving on autopilot as she crossed the street toward the bus stop. She did not see the car running the red light, did not see the flash of headlights or hear the screech of tires. 1 second she was walking, and the next someone yanked her backward with such force she stumbled and fell, landing hard on the curb as the car blew past inches from where she had been standing. Her heart hammered. Her hands shook. She looked up to see Thomas Mitchell standing over her, his face pale with fear, and something else, something fierce and determined. What are you doing? Sarah gasped. Making sure you are okay, Thomas said, helping her sit up. The wall Sarah had built around herself, the one that had kept her standing through homelessness and poverty and endless invisible days, finally crumbled. I cannot do this anymore, she said, tears streaming down her face. I cannot keep pretending I am fine. Thomas sat beside her on the curb, not touching her but present, solid, real. Then stop pretending. Sarah told him everything. The eviction notice, the impossible math of her bank account, the exhaustion that lived in her bones. the pain that never stopped. "I tried to do it alone," she said. "I am so tired of being alone." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "You know what I realized," he said finally. "The night you saved me, you did not do it alone." "What?" Sarah asked. "You had your team," Thomas said. "You had support, equipment, a system that worked. And I have spent 13 years with all the resources in the world, completely alone. We are both soldiers who forgot how to accept help." "You do not owe me anything," Sarah said. "Yes, I do," Thomas replied. "But more than that, I need this. I need to know that your sacrifice meant something. Let me help you so I can help myself." The sunrise blazed behind them, symbolic and perfect, a new day breaking over a city full of invisible people fighting invisible wars. "If I do this," Sarah said slowly, "it has to be real, not charity. I have to earn it." "I would not offer anything less," Thomas said. He explained the position then. Veterans Affairs Coordinator for Mitchell Defense Solutions. She would manage the employment program, work directly with the VA, help other veterans navigate the system that had failed her. Real salary, real benefits, training provided. "You would use everything you learned in the military," Thomas said. "Leadership, crisis management, medical knowledge, the ability to stay calm under pressure." "Why that position?" Sarah asked. "Because nobody understands what these veterans need better than you," Thomas said. "And selfishly, I need someone I can trust with this. Someone who will not let me take the easy way out." Sarah felt tears falling again, but these were different, touched with something she had not felt in years. "Hope. I do not know if I can. You flatlined twice, and I brought you back," Thomas said gently. "You can do anything." 1 week later, Sarah walked into Mitchell Defense Solutions for her first day. Nervous in clothes Thomas had helped her buy at cost, an arrangement that would be paid back through her paycheck, because he understood her pride and respected it. The office was intimidating, all glass and steel and modern design, people moving with purpose through spaces that smelled of coffee and success. Thomas introduced her to the team, and she saw skepticism in some faces, especially from HR. "She has no corporate experience," someone said. "She has leadership experience under conditions none of us can imagine," Thomas replied, his voice firm. "She will be fine." Sarah met the veterans in the program that first day, men and women of various ages carrying various struggles, and her instincts kicked in immediately. One young veteran named Marcus reminded her of soldiers she had served with. The way he held himself tense and coiled, the way he could not hold eye contact. "It is okay," Sarah said instinctively. "I get it. Take your time." Marcus looked up and saw her tattoo, no longer hidden beneath long sleeves but visible on her forearm. "You served?" he asked. "Yeah," Sarah said, "and I understand what you are going through." Connection formed instantly, recognition passing between them. The unspoken language of people who had seen things civilians could not imagine. 3 months passed, and Sarah found her rhythm. The program expanded under her leadership, her military experience translating perfectly to coordinating complex systems and managing people under stress. She helped place 15 veterans in meaningful work, started a support group that met weekly in the office conference room, became someone others could lean on. Her apartment was better now, a small 1-bedroom in a safer neighborhood. Her health was improving. She was in therapy, finally, working through the PTSD and survivor guilt with someone who understood combat trauma. But more than the logistics and the improvements, she had purpose again. She was training to become a certified peer support specialist, channeling everything she had learned in the military and everything she had survived afterward into helping others find their way home. Thomas and Sarah met weekly to review the program, and their conversations were easy now. Built on mutual respect and genuine friendship, 2 soldiers who had found in each other what they both needed most. The annual Veterans Gala arrived 1 year after their first encounter, and Sarah stood in the same lobby where she had once pushed a mop, but this time she wore a simple, dignified dress and attended as the Veterans Affairs Coordinator. Thomas found her before the event started. "You ready?" he asked. "I do not know," Sarah said. "This is weird." "You have briefed generals," Thomas reminded her. "You have saved lives under fire. You have got this." The gala began, and Sarah mingled, telling veterans about the program, making connections, feeling simultaneously like herself and like someone completely new. She ran into the corporate sponsors who had mocked her a year ago, the ones who had laughed when her cart tipped over, and they did not recognize her. One of them started complaining about government handouts for veterans, and Sarah stepped forward, calm but firm, educating him about veteran employment challenges with facts and passion and personal knowledge that left him speechless. Thomas watched from across the room, pride evident on his face. The keynote speech came, and Thomas stood at the podium, distinguished and confident, and began his prepared remarks about supporting veterans. Then, midway through, he went off script. "Last year," he said, "I stood at this podium and talked about supporting our veterans, but I did not really understand what that meant until I met someone." He told their story with Sarah's permission, the combat medic who saved his life in Kandahar. How he found her, 13 years later, working as a janitor, invisible and forgotten by the system she had served. "We pin medals on heroes and then forget them when the cameras are off," Thomas said. "Real support is not speeches and donations. It is action, dignity, opportunity." He introduced Sarah to the room, and she stood, uncomfortable with the attention, but standing anyway because that was what soldiers did. Applause filled the hall, genuine and moved, and several veterans in the audience were crying. Sarah saw Marcus in the crowd, employed now and thriving, and he gave her a thumbs up that made her smile, despite her discomfort. Late that evening, after the gala ended, Sarah and Thomas stood on the Veterans Hall steps, the same steps where she had once been invisible, watching guests leave. "You did not have to do that," Sarah said. "Yes, I did," Thomas replied. "People need to know I am just one person." "You are never just one person," Thomas said. "Not to me, not to the 8 soldiers on record, not to the 15 veterans working now because you believed in them." Comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that only exists between people who truly understand each other. "Thank you," Sarah said, "for seeing me when I was invisible." "Thank you for not letting me die in Kandahar," Thomas said, "and for saving me again from myself." They watched veterans leaving the gala, laughing and connecting, and Sarah thought about all the years she had spent angry that she could not save everyone. "You know what is strange?" she said. "I spent years angry that I could not save everyone. But maybe that was never the point. Maybe it is just about showing up. For the ones you can reach." "Sounds like something a hero would say," Thomas said. "I am not a hero," Sarah said, smiling. "I am just someone who refused to quit." Her tattoo was visible in the moonlight, no longer hidden, and they stood side by side. 2 soldiers who found each other when they needed it most, proof that redemption was not about grand gestures, but about seeing and being seen, about refusing to let invisible heroes remain invisible. Sarah had spent years dismissed and forgotten by the world she served. Thomas had spent years searching for meaning, trying to fill the void with money and medals and charity that never touched the wound. But that night in the Veterans Hall, when laughter turned to recognition, 2 broken soldiers found what they had been missing. Not rescue, not salvation, but something simpler and more profound. Someone who understood. We pass by invisible heroes every single day. The janitor, the cashier, the person we do not bother to see. Behind every uniform there is a story. Behind every struggle there is a warrior still fighting. Sarah did not need pity. She needed opportunity. Thomas did not need redemption. He needed purpose. Together they built something neither could have created alone, a bridge between what was lost and what could be found again. This story is not about going from rags to riches. It is about going from invisible to seen, from forgotten to remembered, from alone to understood. The next time you see someone society has overlooked, remember you might be looking at a hero who just needs someone to look back. If this story touched you, share it. Someone out there needs to hear it. Someone out there is Sarah, still fighting, still invisible, still waiting to be seen.